Hello, everyone, and welcome to, we think, episode 6. We were just discussing, and I don't have it in front of me. To tell you the truth, I have no idea. I am Matt Franco. He is Mike Folk, and we are here at Mike's office today for a change of pace. And we have a very special guest, a longtime veteran of the New York City wine scene, someone who's basically done everything, I think, from supplier to producer to restaurant. Have you ever done retail?
Yeah.
So there we go. She hits it all, but she's here mainly today as to discuss the state of the wine business from the on-premise, or what we call on-premise is restaurant bar type scene where people are consuming the wine on premises. And she's kind of a legend in the New York wine scene, and we're very excited to have Lee Campbell.
Hello. And by the way, so you pronounce your name Folk?
Folk. Like the U doesn't exist.
Folk, yeah. That's disappointing, because Joe always said Folk. Folk style.
Right. Well, that's where the name comes from of the podcast.
What?
It was a Joe line.
What was it?
To tell you the truth, I have no idea.
Yes,
Awesome.
In his interview, the famous interview with Alice.
The folk style.
She's asking him all these questions, and at one point he just says, "To tell you the truth, I have no idea." So you're a perfect person, I guess, to finally explain to everyone where the name for this actually came from, because where I first met you is when you were still working. When you were a rep for LDM, Louis Dresner Imports, which is. Joe Dresner was another kind of iconoclastic legend of the New York City wine scene. And, that whole book and the whole energy that was going on at the time was kind of the dawn of natural wine, or artisan wine, boutique wine really becoming, that was, we often lament that we had the golden era of artisan, boutique, tiny production, honest, natural, whatever you want to say, wine. And how that has kind of already ended, but LDM really represented the dawn of that. But before we get into any of that, why don't you just welcome, first of all, and then tell us a little bit about your backstory, how you got in, and kind of,
Well, yeah, Joe called it real wine, and Joe is a constant touchstone for me professionally, but I think just in terms of seeking truth, having a sense of humor, always being able to evolve, pivot. I miss him a lot all the time. Mm-hmm. But interestingly enough, I met him when I was working at Chamber Street Wines, retail.
That's right.
And he and David were, collaborators, and really in the early days, sourcing a lot together on their trips to Europe. I met Joe. I took to him immediately. I took to Denise immediately. I took to Kevin McKenna immediately. And so it was a relief, because I had found my people. Especially because I think at that point, there weren't these different avenues. There was kind of artisan wine, and within artisan wine, there was a burgeoning sense of this natural wine that was coming about. But it wasn't so separate, and it certainly wasn't even in some ways separate within these portfolios, like the Dresner portfolio. Maybe some of those producers have been shed, but in the early days, it was really just about finding these smaller producers that were on these, pathways that were outside of the big, prestigious appellations.
Yeah.
We realized that we didn't really want to be in the Burgundy game, give or take. There were some exceptions to that, but the Beaujolais game suited us very well.
And Loire.
Beaujolais, Loire, yeah.
And clearly the Loire.
Yeah.
And then when Kevin started to build the book in Italy, it really all started to come together. But yeah, my background is as sort of a person who came from an immigrant family, was expected to do certain things with her life, and then didn't do any of those things. Spent all the money on the undergrad education, though. And, which I think is important, because I think you have to have like a broad liberal sort of arts background to do a lot of this stuff. And I think there's a love for learning that is always validated by this work. Was living in Washington, D.C., thought I was going to become a lawyer, wanted to work on the Hill, had done some internships on the Hill with people like Moynihan, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, and then had a meal that changed my life and, found a pathway in. And that was a restaurant in Washington, D.C. called Nora. It's quite iconic, no longer in existence. And the woman who led that was an Austrian-born woman named Nora Pouillon, and her partners, both her life partner and his brother, who were from Jersey. And they were just smart as a whip, and they made it okay to take food seriously. Because up until that point, I didn't think it was okay to take food seriously. I thought it was just something that I was going to have to earn enough money to spend money in restaurants. And I think that's, the reality for a lot of people in the United States. And certainly if you come from certain backgrounds where you are supposed to be a doctor, lawyer, teacher, or, finance person. But anyway, I met these people in DC, and to be fair, before I met my wine people, the Dresners and, all of those people, I met these people, the Pouillon D'Amatos in DC, and they sort of led the way, and they sort of shined a light on a path that I desperately wanted, but I didn't even know existed. And to do it in a way that was accountable. So she was actually the first certified organic restaurant in the United States.
Oh.
She was sort of like, she's still with us. Nora is very much alive, but she no longer has her restaurants. And so she was sort of known as like East Coast Alice Waters, a little bit lower profile, much to her disappointment. And they made it really clear about where they were sourcing, who they collaborated with to put their restaurant together. It was one of those restaurants that did everything inside the restaurant. So they did their own laundry, I thought this was how restaurants worked, and it wasn't until I came to New York that I was like, oh, so we're not gonna be closed for a month in January and a month in August, and we send out our linens, and we don't have amazing, Vietnamese chef who's cooking us lunch every day. I thought that, we have to be open for lunch, and we have to be open on Sundays. And so in some ways they introduced me to a restaurant style that doesn't actually exist in the United States, and certainly doesn't exist in New York. But anyway, they hooked me, and then I came back to New York, hit the ground running, worked in a lot of restaurants, and then was working in a restaurant called Gotham Bar and Grill as a floor manager, and realized that, Michael Greenlee was having all the fun, and he was the wine director. And that was, I think, part of my impetus, is just, I realized that I was much better at telling stories and kind of painting a picture than I was at like managing schedules and closing restaurants and things like that. And so after I realized that wine was what I wanted to pursue, and certainly because I knew that there was this need to always learn and push myself to evolve intellectually to be in wine, I was just off and running. And then, like I said, I was really lucky that I learned kind of who my people were early on in the wine business. I was a little bit torn because I spent some time being mentored and working for Terry Thies, and I still think that what he contributed is extraordinary to this business. And I think that really foundational work, not just with Gruyere Champagne and Riesling and Gruner Veltliner, but also with a style of writing and a style of teaching that was really, really innovative. And regardless of what people think he did or didn't do, and I don't think everybody really understands, I owe him a lot. But at the end of the day, just there's nothing like that motley crew of people that you meet on the natural wine trail. And I was lucky enough to go to the Debouté like 20 years ago. And yeah, I just knew that that was it. Okay, I'll stop talking.
There we go.
No, you were doing, that was fantastic. Yeah, that's a really interesting point you made before, is that when LDM first started out, it was just about finding people making real wine that was not just about like scores and international varietals and international styles and the kind of luxury game.
It was enough to sell at like Grelot. Yeah. Like you didn't, like, I'm not saying they weren't trying to make sure people weren't working well, but what Denise and Joe had told me was that, you know, they had this, I guess they still do, have this ramshackle little farmhouse in the Mâconnais. And so really it was just about going to their farmhouse in the summers and then just setting off in a car and seeing who they met and talking to their neighbors. And so the book really just sort of was built in that way.
Yeah.
And certainly, eventually, it evolved in a certain specific direction. And as we know, when you taste wine that's alive, like I always do the backup, right? Taste the wine, do I like the wine, and then figure out how it's made, right? Because 9 times out of 10, the wines I love are checking all the boxes. You don't have to check all the boxes and then make yourself like the wine.
Right.
I think that's why there's so many shitty portfolios out there.
Well said.
Yeah, yeah, and you think about the original, the OG producers in that book, and Roailly and Wallet and
Yeah.
Briord, and
Yeah.
it was all just so I started working in the business in 2003 at my uncle's store, and he was good friends with Joe
And where was the store?
in Connecticut, and he back then, like all of those wines from Joe and Neil and Kermit and a couple other, but like those were the things that we were the most excited about. Beaujolais, that's not George Duboff. Like this is real, like Beaujolais
right.
is a real wine. It's
That's
not
right.
just like some silly thing that
It's not just a
French
party.
people- Right. And yeah, exactly.
I mean, it is a party though, but yes.
And tasting my first Loire Cab Franc, my first like Chinon or whatever, Borgo, and just being like, oh my gosh, there is so much more to wine. And I would kind of always refer to like people our age as like the Cab Franc, Gamay, Nebbiolo generation, because like that was like, any new grape was exciting and interesting, but like that was like when those regions were ascendant. And oddly enough, now that's all kind of like old people wine.
Yeah, I mean, just to understand how the dogma, I think, sometimes took over is to look at an estate like Raffo, right? When I first came to know Raffo, they were obviously artisan. It was a family estate. Certainly they were working well and they were working sustainably. But I don't think in the early days they were necessarily organic, and they really they leaned into that over time. And sometimes they leaned into that because I don't know. It's like people like the Dresners. They created a community of people that learned from each other. I mean, that's part of the things that's so special about certain portfolios, but in specifics, because I've had so much experience with the Louis Dresner portfolio, is that they create their own community outside of the U.S. market, and they learn from each other, and they inspire each other, and they compete with each other. And it's exciting to see how sometimes it happens because another generation is taking over, but just as much it just happens because people needed time and resources to be able to evolve in the ideal direction.
Yeah. I mean, just think about those tastings you guys have at the Puck Building or wherever, where the producers were all there, and they were there as much to chat with each other about, what are you doing?
Get back to your table and pour some wine.
Yeah.
It was upstairs over Astor, but yes.
That's right. Yeah.
Just in our old offices, to tell you the truth.
Yep.
I think you brought up a really good point about I forget which importer it is that has this phrase. It's like place over process. Maybe it's Eric, what's his name? A lot of Spanish wine. He's got some great French stuff too.
Eric Solomon?
Eric Solomon, thank you. Maybe it's not him, but
Maybe
there is someone who has the phrase like place over process.
I like that.
And but what's interesting, and I think this is what you were getting at, is that now so many people who have come along and put together portfolios since natural wine, real wine has become a thing, it almost is process over place.
Yeah, and we know that there are wine programs that are based on that too. There are, groups of friends that are based on that too. But yeah, I think that for me, obviously people are also really important, and so you want there to be a level of respect and friendship within the place, I guess. So I guess that's the other touchstone. And it can be hard sometimes. I think that if you have friends who you really like and you don't like their wine as much, I mean, that's a challenge. But I do feel like I see a lot of portfolios in New York that are very mediocre, and I'm not sure why they're putting this much time and work into having this kind of business, especially right now, when their wines are just okay.
Yeah, that's a very good observation / question is that.
I mean, even back in the day, like I could say that, I probably earlier than later evolved to a point where I hated like most of the wines in the Grateful Palate portfolio. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this was, ground zero for Shiraz. But, but most of those wines for what they were doing were good, what can I say? So like, yes, I mean, I just feel that sometimes it feels like we have become victims of our own popularity, and so people look at our lives or look at our work and they think it's either easier than it looks, or they think there's room for yet another book. And I would like to see fewer books. I'd like to see fewer reps, fewer books.
Well, and that's probably a good segue, because right now you're obviously in a restaurant, and so
round and round I go. I'm always right now I'm at a restaurant
right now, and you've been at several. You've put together some fabulous wine lists. We always inevitably talk about this time period that we're in now versus what it was like, and everything that you just referenced was in this golden age, which was such an amazing time to kind of come up in this business. So what's your take now? Like, what do you see now, even beyond the restaurant position, but I want to bring it to that, just how you see this market today versus what it was like in that period?
Yeah, I just think it's almost like, in the United States, it's like we have, I have like memberships to 8 streaming services and I can never find anything to watch.
Right.
That just feels a little bit what's going on in the market. Like, choice is good, but now we have too much choice. It's, if I realize like I'm a really like not very efficient orderer. Like look, I came up behind the David Lillies, who had his long legal pad and, placed his 20 case order from that company and then that company and then that company every week. And I hate when I do this, but I end up ordering from sometimes the same company twice a week. Now, like maybe they're substantial orders and maybe these are my go-to companies, but part of it is because everything is so fragmented and splintered that it becomes really hard sometimes to focus in the way that you'd like to. And you've got obviously so many people knocking on your door. Look, I don't know if we needed, more Paramounts and Empires and Charmers and all of that in the world, but they did serve a purpose in that they became, kind of a clearinghouse for several different very good import books. And you knew where you're going to for certain wines. But now it's just, everybody has wine, and so most people have something good, and so you have to discipline yourself to not open the door to somebody because they have something good, because it's kind of usually a waste of everybody's time. So yeah, I mean, I think the other thing that happens is, as a wine list writer, you get caught up in your own ego a little bit, and you want to create. First of all, like, I keep trying to get to the platonic ideal of a wine list. I'm like, next week, it's going to be the perfect wine program, the one that I have in my head. And then 2 weeks go by. I'm like, that didn't work out and that didn't work out. But like next month, it's going to be exactly what I want. And you keep trying to get to this thing without understanding that it is a living organism. It is not supposed to be static. These lists that people write that win awards, fine, I get it. They have to play the game. Or some people are really, like, that's their style of wine program, to have all the different things. But Andrew and I are just much more into like a living, breathing organism. Things come, they go. We don't want to be sitting on tons and tons of inventory. And it's never going to be a perfect list.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think you just have to make your commitments, decide who you're going to work with, and realize you're not going to have every wine that you love.
Yeah.
You're never going to have every wine that you love, or you're going to have it, you're going to get 6 bottles of it. It's going to be, I got some Richard Leroy a couple weeks ago. People were maniacal over this wine. Oh my God, I had somebody come in 3 times in 1 week to drink, it's just like I had 9 bottles, so, and it was fun. It was fun, and it brought people such pleasure, because these weren't just people that were, like maybe they were cherry picking, but the best of it, like so joyful about it, so psyched and excited. Sometimes I feel like people come in, they drink like Overnois, and they're just like ticking a box, and I don't even know if they like it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But sometimes people come in, they're just like, this is amazing, this is delicious, the price is good, I don't have to go to France. And then you got to let it go, because you're just like, maybe I'll get some, maybe I won't. Maybe I'll get more, maybe I won't get more. I don't know. I'm never going to have the perfect wine list.
Yeah. And do you feel like that's a lot different today than it was, say, 10 years ago or even pre-COVID?
Well, I guess, yes. I think it's harder. All the allocations are much more competed over. And, we know that there was a day when nobody wanted any Ariana Ogapinti, or people didn't even know what Overnois was. I remember when we used to allocate Overnois when I worked at Dresner, and it was like David and a handful of other people, because nobody knew what it was, right? So now everybody knows what it is, and they want it, I don't even know if they want to drink it or they want to sell it, but they want it. And I try really hard personally not to go after allocations that don't honor our wine program and aren't, so let's say nobody came in and drank that wine, it fits in the wine program, it's appropriate, or we want to drink that wine. I don't want to just have it to have it. I also don't want to just have it to certainly I know if you get like a few bottles of DRC, you're going to sell them, and I appreciate that, but I'm also just like not a clearinghouse. You know what I mean? This isn't just like, well, we know we're going to make bucks on that, so let's just get it in and get it out. Like, it's so cynical to me, that kind of work.
Yeah.
Now look, I know that we have to make money. I know we're in business. I sometimes need to be reminded this, but yeah, I want to make sure that there is a thread and a commonality to everything that comes in the door, and that it makes sense within the walls of Borgo. And in terms of how was it 10 years ago, yeah, I just think that in some ways, people are more educated and they just know more and they know what wines to go for. And remember, everybody is online looking at the same bottle shops, bottle picks, looking at the same blogs. And so they know what's hot, or they know what's on the come up. But I think in another way, I try to tell most people that I work with in terms of reps and importers, if I can't have the wine, I can't have the wine. That's fine. That's fine, because there's like actually always something else.
There's always something else, for sure. Yeah. That's been, I guess my thought was that my biggest complaint right now is that, because yes, I sell, high-end collector wine, and yes, I sell the, cheap and cheerful stuff, but my meat and potatoes, and this is something I've mentioned many times before, has always been that the middle of the books. Everybody's book is where all the magic really is. It's either the producers who are destined to become allocated wines, but nobody knows about them yet, or it's just all the fun, interesting stuff made by really honest, really thoughtful producers, oftentimes from more far-flung appellations or whatever else. And that was always there was always excitement, at least for my customer base, for us selling that stuff. That's, cost between, say, $30 and $70 a bottle retail.
My question to you is, personally, I've had very few experiences where I've tasted a wine that was either extremely, extremely allocated or extremely expensive, and it was that much better than the $60 bottle of wine.
It almost never is, because it's not, it's the price once you get past, let's say, like $100 wholesale. Really, after that is all supply and demand, or other external factors.
I know there's some things that are going on in certain people's vineyards and certain people's cellars where they, are putting a lot of resources into these wines. But you get to this point where it just doesn't line up anymore. And it's hard for me to get excited about those wines because, a guy that I know who has a wine apple/grape wine project in Charlottesville, Virginia. His name's Patrick Collins, and his project is called Patois. He's like, I'm tired of people fetishizing lac. And I think that's such an interesting thing to think about, because, I'm kind of a witch, and I'm very much into energy and all of that stuff, energy currents. And I'm always trying to come from a place of prosperity and generosity and wealth. So what does it say when your business plan or your sort of ideal becomes about not having, people not having, and this idea of lack, and that you can't share it with everybody? I don't, that's not what I got into hospitality for. No. So
and nobody really who works in the business, aside from certain elements, ever really wanted wine to get to a place where everybody, especially in the crowd that we kind of all came up in, it's like you go to somebody's house or like, an industry party or whatever, it was like everyone pulling as many corks as possible, and it's not fetishizing the bottle and worrying about if it doesn't get
and it wasn't a
finished.
competition.
No, it wasn't a
sometimes you go to
competition.
places and I feel like people are competing with each other as to the bottles they brought. And you're like, God, I remember when it was love, like we knew we were going to drink wine.
Mm-hmm.
So that actually wasn't really the point. The point was to be with each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and share.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, the fetishized bottle dinners where everyone shows up with 3 bottles of something super high end, and it's all like a bragging competition, and you wonder if anybody's
and the picture ends up online.
And you wonder if people are actually even enjoying the wine. It just becomes, I've been to so many of those, and don't get me wrong, I like it, and I'm extremely, grateful for the wine people have shared with me. But when it becomes like, I don't want to like name names about, events and whatever, but the amount of all of this wine is so fetishized, and then so much of it just gets pissed away at these
or even poured out.
Yeah, like, because if you're taking a sip of 93 Sauzet Chevalier, and then somebody else comes along with something even more important, and you dump that out.
God, yeah.
And that's what happens.
Yeah.
And
Yes. Oh yeah.
It's
heartbreaking.
So gross, and whether it's the big events where that happens or these small dinners, and like none of the wine gets enjoyed, and so like you have that element of the wine business, and then there was like this excitement for all the new and interesting stuff. And I guess my question to you is, the customers coming into Borgo right now, is there still excitement for that cool underappreciated middle of the road stuff, or is it just people coming in looking for that?
No, because it's like, maybe no, because I think that we like this framework of like access is really like a tiny bubble within the larger landscape.
For sure.
So I think the reason I've always loved retail and restaurants is because your bread and butter are just regular people. Now, maybe not for you. Maybe you have so many collectors.
I mean,
that you're
yes and
dealing
no,
with.
but like, yeah.
But even the collectors, like, okay, so one of my business associates for my winery, he's an investor in my winery, and he knows tons about wine, right? He's a Chevalier, the whole thing. But he comes into my restaurant for dinner, and that's my and I've drank at his house, and he always shares beautiful wines. But when he came in, I was like, well, what do you want to drink? Now, he was with his sisters, so there's a family element, and you want to make sure everybody's happy. But I also want to make sure he was happy, but I also wanted to give him something that I knew he didn't usually drink. So I just picked like a couple of bottles, and like he was just like, what is this? And I loved it. And so it was still wine from Champagne, which is old hat to us. Mm-hmm. But and the other thing is, for this category, which like I'm not that excited about any categories at wines at this point, but I'm still pretty excited about this category, because what it is that whether the champagne producers were always making still wines and just not exporting them, or some of them are getting into the game of making still wines, it's just all of a sudden we're seeing more and more cuvées show up on our shores. Mm-hmm, and for somebody like me that's been doing this forever and there's almost no new categories, it's really fun to explore. But then to share this with somebody who knows a whole lot about wine and has had access to the best Burgundies and the best wines of the world, but has never seen this little fledgling rustic expression of Northern Burgundy, that's really fun. Yeah. I would say that some people come in, they know a lot about wine. Some people come in, and the lion's share of our customers are not winos. Mm-hmm. They're just people with good taste and money to spend. Mm-hmm. So I try to give them wines of good taste, and if they want to spend money, I try to allow them to, but I don't like to have to necessitate it or kind of, I don't want to say bully people into, but I want people to feel like they can find a really good bottle for $120.
Yeah.
And I don't want people to feel like to go out in New York means to spend $500 on a bottle of wine.
Right. And
like that's the that's the level of entry.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or that you should feel like you have to impress people.
Right.
Well, and one of the things that I found really frustrating, sort of at the end of this cycle that we were in before COVID, was that you found these restaurant lists that were getting, the restaurants were getting all this press, and the wine lists were getting all this press, and barring a few exceptions, a lot of them looked the same. They had the same domains, the same cuvées, same regions covered, And it almost felt like that, like they needed to do that in order to get certain people in the door that they knew they were going to move those, they were
Right.
going to move those wines to.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's less of an issue now, or at least where you're coming from?
Not really. I mean, my feeling is that I think it just keeps getting a little more ratcheted up. I mean, it feels like pricing is getting more and more ratcheted up. And people can find reasons to validate that pricing because these are very rare wines and they don't show up that often in the market. But I don't know, I just feel very, I come from I mentioned David Lilly before, but I'm part of the David Lilly diaspora, which is a person would come into Chambers Street in the early aughts and ask to spend $75 on a bottle of Burgundy, and he would send them on their way with a $30 bottle of Morgon. And that, I had to fight some of those tendencies when we opened Borgo, especially because all our other restaurants were in Brooklyn, and it's not like people didn't have money in Brooklyn, but we just spent our money differently in Brooklyn. And Manhattan is a different game, and Andrew and I have had some tense conversations, and we almost never have tense conversations about what it meant to open a restaurant in Manhattan and not leaving money on the table. And I was leaving some money on the table when we first opened because I was still like, we've got to have a $14 glass pour. That's our heart and soul, Put a $14 glass pour on the wine list, nobody wants it because they think something's wrong with it.
Or it's becoming a greater challenge to find something that you want to put on the list for $14.
But they're still out there.
Sure.
So, I mean, it is cynical. Sometimes I find that $16 glass pour and I just charge a little bit more money for it because I want it on the list. I hate that. I don't love it, but we're working within a certain framework, and sometimes we get to lead and sometimes we have to follow a little bit. And I think what's most important to me is that I think the bulk of everything in our wine program is really who we are and where we come from. And there's a few other things that are, maybe a little bit less so, but I try to always find a way in. Like I said I was never going to have Gaia on my wine list. I'm never going to have Gaia on my wine list. Never. I have some Gaia on my wine list right now. So, and what happened was I tasted an old bottle of Story Tilden, and I was just like, this shit is good. Like, honestly, I think part of it was that, first of all, I came up with those wines. I sommed those wines, right? When I was younger. And so I had liked those wines at one point, but we also know that some of these wines ebbed and changed and became oakier and more extracted and all of that stuff. But sometimes you just find those old bottles and they're beautiful. So now I have some old Gaia on my list.
Yeah, I mean, old man Gaia, those wines from the 60s are fabulous.
Not that old.
Yeah. When Angelo took over, I still maintain that I don't think I've ever had one of Angelo's wines that was actually like fully mature. I've had some good ones, that were pretty enjoyable, but
and then
I haven't had one in 15 years.
I think the other thing I realized was that, number one, I didn't really want to have a wine program with anything over. The only thing I'll carry that's in the 70s usually is my birth year, 1971. But otherwise, I don't really want a lot of old wine in Borgo. I don't want, while I now have a sommelier team in place that I think could handle the delivery and the opening and all of that stuff, we just infrastructurally don't really have space for a lot of that kind of stuff. We share a very tiny wine station with all of our servers who are opening wines by the glass. It's wild. And I also think that my palate isn't very responsive to a lot of old wine. And that's just who I am. I like to taste old wine occasionally, but it's just not my forte. It's not what I'm passionate about. And there's other people that are going to do it better. So I don't really go over more than like 25, 30 years.
Well, that seems like a good place where you can find that balance between wanting to insert your personality and your personal taste onto something. But obviously not in a way that's overboard, because you're going to have people that want those things. So it seems like that's a good example of something where you can sort of say, like, that's not going to be our thing. Sure, there's some of it, but
and I think that's what a wine program is at its best. Is like it's somebody's decision. It's somebody's personality. And, certainly Andrew's restaurants have a personality. And that personally is a lot to do with my personality. So we have our voice. We're going to really try to honor that voice and let other people honor their voices.
Yeah. And and I think, and this is what, I didn't see the wine list at Borgo, full disclosure, when I ate there because we BYO'd. But speaking of those lists that you were mentioning before, the ones that get all the awards and they have all the same wines, it takes no skill to have everybody's everything, to have a wine list that's this thick. Like, that's not, and I'm not like talking crap about the people who have that, but like, it doesn't take, like, what makes, what made Andrew's restaurants and your work always so special is that there was an energy and an evolution, not just over like long periods of time, but throughout the year. Like, and to have a succinct wine list that had an interesting, like a clear point of view, and that's still, like, it's, not many people are good at that.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think also sometimes it just comes down to space and logistics.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
It is really tricky to maintain a lot of inventory, and that's also a lot of resources. So I think at least, and who knows who Borgo, E. Truly was there. We were in the same space as E. Truly. That was their 20 years. I'm sure their wine program when they started wasn't the same wine program they ended up in. So there's always got to be space for evolution. But for now, if we're carrying a little bit of Bordeaux, then I'd just like to just find a couple of things that I like from good vintages that are drinking right now that, that's it. And then it won't be there next time you come, we'll have something else.
Yeah, and that's what I mean with it's like there's, that wine list has, there's a personality to it because the person behind it has a personality and a point of view and a belief in, what the current menu is and how this is all going to interact with that. And
or just like my strange idiosyncrasy, like there's a producer I was tasting the other day, it's in Brunello, and I just keep feeling like I'm supposed to like this producer. So I just keep going back to the well and keep tasting it over and over again. And every time I taste it, I'm like, nope, I did it with like 3 producers last week. I was like so happy. These people, I was like, I really just want to revisit these producers because So we did like deep dive into these producers and I was like, I still don't like any of them, because that's just what it is, and it just doesn't matter. I don't need to carry them. I need to carry wines that I'm excited about.
Yeah.
So
that's it. I mean, we all have those producers where it's like,
haven't had my moment yet.
I haven't had my moment yet. I don't see what the big deal is. Like, I see the wines they're good, but like what is all this momentum or hype behind them?
Do you know how much fun it is? And do you know when people respond to me the most is when they're like, tell me about this wine. And I'm like, oh, let me tell you about this wine.
That's it. That's what you want. It's no fun if that's not the case, right? And that's like, I don't know, it's the whole allocation game and the high-end thing and the hype and the blah, 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 that's no fun. And it's the business, I feel like, used to be fundamentally more enjoyable from that perspective, because there was always something to be excited about. Now there are other reasons like that we've discussed on this, like maybe it's just like we've discovered most of the stuff, but and when your entry point into an industry is Anjou and not Dijon, then it just changes how you interact with the market. Totally. Yeah. And we were fortunate enough to come up at a time where we were bucking the critic-driven, polished, heavy,
the point
wines, and I couldn't have cared less at the time about, insert high-end Napa Valley subscription wine or whatever else, or even just like Bordeaux. But I'm classified.
But
Bordeaux.
Here's what's wacky. I probably read more reviews now than I ever read in my youth.
That's very interesting.
Because I have my favorites. I have people who I'm like, I like their palate, or I know them personally. I know what they're like, championing. And so, in my maturity, I feel like, because I feel like I have enough information to know how to read a review.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, and given how the education level of people that are coming in to drink wine has changed, do you find those moments where you can really dive in and give people that story? Is that happening more? Is it less? How does that feel?
I think it's the same. I mean, I feel like I really can share the story with people. And I think what's interesting is Americans are more interested than they ever were in wine. So, you tweak the story according to who you're talking to, but people love the story. They still love the story.
Yeah. So That's a nice segue actually into like one of the main beefs that I've had, and I think Mike shares it, is that, and this is very, I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about, like, for, like you said, it's a Manhattan restaurant, it's different than the Brooklyn vibe. So do you feel like you're still seeing like young people coming in, and if they to the extent that they are, do they care about the excitement and the learning and all of that the way that we did when we were in our 20s?
Well, I just think these are different people, right? Like, these are not wine geeks. I mean, some people that come in are wine geeks, and they are all of different ages, but most of them are middle-aged. The younger people that come in are usually not the wine geeks, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of young wine geeks out there. It just means that, like, at Borgo, the demographic is not necessarily that. It might have to do with price point and other things, or location. But yeah, I would just say that there are, lots of people that are still like asking questions, very excited about wine, and, excited to see that. I mean, here's one thing that goes on is things like, I don't sell as much orange wine by the glass as I had assumed I would. And partially, when I first opened, I think I always made sure I had 2 orange wines by the glass, but I also didn't tell anybody they were orange, which was complicated because I hate segregating orange wine, because we know it's just basically a continuum, and it becomes really hard to know when you like call a wine orange and when you don't. So, but what I realized is just that our demographic didn't crave as much orange wine, partially because a lot of people have been burnt, and so that's okay. So it just means I sell more like Chardonnay and Chenin. Do you know what I mean? Like, but it just, things that I thought were going to happen didn't happen. There was more of a call for chilled reds than I was prepared for.
Yes, that's right.
I'm kind of over it, because I'm kind of like, the other thing that I noticed that a lot of people in New York do as proprietors and wine buyers is that they buy wines and they chill them, and they shouldn't be chilled, because not every light red should be served chilled.
Good point.
Because it's cheap or cheerful or has a cute label. It's a tannic structure, it's a minerality structure. It's really about fruit and like tannic structure, and not everything that's light bodied should be served. You're doing a disservice to a lot of light reds to chill them. So I think that's tricky for me, because I only find a few things that I actually want to chill fully. So I think what I do is basically I just buy a lot of dark rosé from Italy and call it chilled red.
That was a technique that we adopted at the shop years ago.
How many Chirasuolo would you like to explore? At the mall.
Well, do you remember like forever? Dark rosé, like you would try to sell, and people were like,
always trying to explain to people, this is what the Italian, it's food friendly. They only drink at the table.
If it didn't look like Provence, people assumed they were going to hate it. It was going to be sweet or whatever. And then there was like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, I guess, when the chiller red started coming, we started buying darker rosés and put them over with the red wines.
That's right.
And all of a sudden, now dark rosés are like hotter than anything. So it's
all of these like categories, sometimes you just can't buy too much into the category.
Well, because the problem also is if you invest too heavily, then next thing you know, the category changes and you're stuck holding the bag.
Right, rosé a few summers ago.
Yeah, that's a big problem on the producer side. Just as one sort of quick anecdote, because I found this funny, I was tasting with a customer the other day, and they mentioned how someone came in asking for chilled red. And so they suggested some things, and the person said, I don't actually know what this is. Can you explain what is chilled red about? And she basically said, yeah, it's when a light red, you can chill it and put it in the fridge. And it was like, oh.
And now you don't have to put ice in it.
Yeah.
Right.
But that also just sort of demonstrates how much of these things are led by the idea that like, well, this is what people are drinking.
Yeah. Or, I've got these wines that are like look orange but don't drink orange. And so that's been a really interesting kind of segue or kind of transition for me with people, because in Italy, since half of my wine list is Italian, because we're an Italian-oriented restaurant, it's really hard to find, in the kinds of wines that we work with, it's very hard for me to find non-macerated Italian whites that are high quality. And but there's a lot of things that are just like barely macerated, or at least barely phenolic.
Right.
but look orange. And so that's been a really interesting, fun thing to explore with people, because we'll just say, oh, well, this is a little bit darker, but the flavor is as they would know and expect it to be if they were drinking wine. So, you know, kind of taking people on that journey, because again, I never signify what whites on my list are orange. Except for one wine that Baru makes in Chablis. And she calls one of her cuvées, because the name of the plot is Orangerie. So I write next to it, not an orange wine. And then I think and then she makes another wine called Ariane that is an orange wine. So I go, is an orange wine. So just for those two and nothing else.
Yeah, well, the nudge is always an important thing, right? Because people left to their own devices oftentimes default to what they know, which is totally fine. But I always thought that, like, what purpose am I serving if I'm not, like, if I just had a floor stack of Sancerre and that was all that anyone came in and bought, like, why even bother come to me when you could just go to the corner liquor store who has that? And so it's always like the subtle nudge without, you know, talking down to people or like saying like, well, we don't stock that because we think it's stupid. But
even your Sancerre would be thoughtful.
The thoughtful Sancerre, right? Like, just like, I love Sancerre, but the fact remains that 80% of it is garbage, and there's a vanishing amount of really good, authentic, proper Sancerre out there. And so
Manitou cellar.
Exactly, Manitou, you know, Fume, like, this is like, there's other stuff. Like, you know, Blake from Rosenthal, his favorite story is always to regale me of the 80s when Fume was everything and nobody drank Sancerre. And now it's completely swapped.
Because the Mondavis or Gallows had Fume Blanc.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. And
nobody knows what Puy is. They're like, Puy? Like, what are we talking about? Where are we?
Yeah.
What's the grape?
Yep.
I love Puy Frisé.
Yeah.
Like, I love a luscious, voluptuous Chardonnay. And nobody knows what it is.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you sell one that's like Maison Valette, which is like not any of those things.
Yeah, right. Well, and then, you know, and it's because I think what happened was, and this is a very interesting thing that just happens in general, but like, people started to get to the point where, well, is Fume the Sauvignon Blanc or is Fuissé the Sauvignon Blanc? They're both Puy. And then it was like, well, Sancerre had the added benefit of sounding very sophisticated when you pronounce it.
And easy to pronounce.
Easy to pronounce, but I'll have a Sancerre, and it sounds, you know, it sounds
I always
sophisticated.
think it's about easy to pronounce.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
That's why Chablis and Sancerre are as popular as they are.
Exactly, yeah. And they're, you know, it's a style that, let's be honest, most people like a crisp mineral white. But little things like that happen, and you don't realize it's happening in real time. But, you know, one of the interesting things was getting back to, like, you know, the dawn of our era in this business and natural
wine. The dawn
wine.
of life.
Yeah, the dawn of natural wine.
We're very nostalgic, so we're going to keep coming back.
We're super nostalgic right now, just because of, you know, everything's so
because
wonky.
we've all known each other for a really long time.
Yeah, that too. But, like, you know, like when the term natural wine started to be a thing.
Well, remember Joe used to resist it.
Yeah, he resisted it, and it was like, and then, you know,
it created a lot of antagonism.
Yeah,
with people like Chapoutier, with people like Terry Thies. It was just like, I don't know that it's worth all of this.
Yeah,
you know, because I think we all agree. You know,
right? Like, everybody wanted quality wines that were made honestly and expressed a place. And then there was like then all of a sudden the natural wine thing kind of like really dug in, but it was really with this small slice of a small slice, right? The geek in the industry, the geek industry, right? And so we had like this kind of like, you know, all this friction and headbutting about what is natural wine and are these wines flawed or are they just, you know, interesting, and like at what point do you say?
I'm also trying to still answer that question.
Right. Yeah. And then
because I don't think there's no one answer.
No, and I don't think there is no one answer, right? And then it kind of died down, and then 7, 8 years ago, natural wine reemerged, but into the more kind of broad, casual wine audience. And so
it became commodified.
It became commodified, right? And so we had this very interesting phenomenon. Like, we're back when we were all sitting there butting heads about it. We had this frame of reference, and I'm not saying that we knew enough, so we were allowed to talk about this stuff, and everybody else wasn't. But especially younger kids started coming in. And I always like to say, like, and again, this is not like an insult or a backhanded, compliment or anything, but it's like, oh, the kind of person who's usually going to ask for Argentine Malbec or Prosecco or something like that, New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, they all started coming in asking for natural wine and orange wine and chilled reds. And then, but like specifically with the natural wine, then it was like we had to rediscover and litigate and figure this out all over again, but with people who didn't necessarily know as much about what they were asking for. And forever, if a wine wasn't in a clear bottle, it didn't have a crown cap, it didn't have a cutesy label, and it didn't look like Gatorade, the person was going to not take it. No matter how natural the wine was in the dark glass bottle I was trying to sell, they just weren't doing it. So then we had this whole like interesting thing, and now that has seemed to have kind of evened out a little bit.
Have.
And it got to the point where, like, yes, natural wine became a commodity, and there was like,
there are worse things than for organic farming and low intervention.
No, it's
winemaking to become, celebrated or at least much more part of like the main framework. But the problem is then a lot of people start to lie about it.
They start to lie about it, and it starts to become about like when natural wine became about the taste and the vibe and the feel.
Yeah.
And that's still a problem that I think we're dealing with.
And that a lot of these conversations are what I'm dealing with at my Virginia winery, which I don't know if you know that I'm a partner in a Virginia winery.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are a lot of the issues that we deal with at my winery because Virginia doesn't have like we're not talking Corsica, right? It's humid. We have a lot of rain events, especially during harvest. People planted all the wrong grapes. So now we're, having sort of our moment to decide what should the grapes of Virginia be. There have actually always been a fair amount of hybrid grapes, but a lot of the more traditional wineries around Charlottesville are very reticent to fuck with hybrids. The people on the wrong side of the tracks, which is the Shenandoah Valley, are kind of pro-hybrid. But
is that, I don't mean to cut you off, but is the reticence more about just the fact that people are going to buy Chardonnay and Cabernet?
That, and also they're just very bougie. They're just very bougie. I mean, I love it. I mean, I am very bougie. So that's why I went to college in Charlottesville. So, I understand these people.
Yeah.
But, I think that we have these conversations at my winery a lot because we're not sure what our perfect terroir is. We're still creating our terroir. Our terroir is still very much in evolution, has a lot to do with what grapes we think we should be planting, which are often hybrids, but not always. But when they're vinifera, they're usually grapes that people are less familiar with, or often grapes that people are less familiar with. And then also, we are very playful in the winery, which means we do make a lot of fun cuvées. Part of the reason we wanted to do that was to turn on its head what a lot of the bougier winemakers were doing, which was always trying to emulate Napa or at least Bordeaux or things like that. So we're like, no, you don't have to take it this seriously. You can have a lot of fun, and you can do. I love blending probably because I don't have the chops as a winemaker. To know how things co-ferment together sometimes. And so I love the idea of, having a few different tanks that I can play with and putting things together. And my partner tells me I'll eventually get past that. That need to control. Can we just put 2% more of Petit Manseng in here? I just need to pop it up a little bit. But we have a lot of those conversations about packaging and about demographic and the youth market. It's fun. And it's annoying, but I think at the end of it, what grounds us is we try to be really, really honest about what we're doing and very transparent about how we're doing it. The fact that most of the grapes that go into our wines are not organic, that we're not at that sort of that moment of our evolution in Virginia. There's very few vineyards that are, forget about certification, but just even honestly organic or biodynamic, because usually there's something that happens at least once during the season that will fuck you up if you don't spray a little mango zeb or something. Now, you can choose not to and then just use a hell of a lot of sulfur, but we know that also sucks. So, these are the questions that we go through at my winery too. And so it's been interesting for me as a producer to make certain decisions, and then as a buyer to try not to be too precious because I know how some of these decisions are made. And then one of the things I like to talk about, and I like to get on my soapbox a little bit about, is that these conversations that we have around dogma in terms of how people are working and if they're working properly and correctly and organically and certainly within the cellar with, low intervention, these are sometimes like conversations of privilege, because if you either come to the wine business already having the resources or having land or having a winery or just having knowledge, it's like a privileged space to be in, to say, I'm going to take these risks, or I'm going to take these chances, or I'm going to hew to my dogma and my belief system regardless. The reality is that most people are not doing as well, and certainly new producers are not necessarily that financially stable. And sometimes you do have to make compromises, at least while you're learning, to get to where you'd like to be. And so I think, thinking about what the journey is really important. Thinking about what people's intention is very important, as opposed to lambasting them for not, for spraying too much or for filtering or, I think there was a book that Alice wrote a while ago, and I think she was saying about this one vintage that Terry Puzola admitted he had to filter or do some shit because he was just like, I wouldn't have had any wine to sell.
Yeah. Which, I think, almost everyone who's being honest with themselves would be completely comfortable with. Yeah.
Well, and that brings up something else too, because like that, all of those things factor in to a lot of other challenges. Like before we were rolling, we were talking about how we started the podcast, just sort of like lamenting how the business has changed, not for the better, with all these like, the New York Times says drinking isn't good for you anymore, and well, nobody ever said it was good for you, but you know what I mean. Cannabis pressure,
right.
Global financial malaise, all this stuff. But the winemakers still have a vintage each year coming, whether or not they sold the previous vintage. And the decisions that they have to make, like you were talking about, especially given the vagaries of vintages that we've been dealing with. And also adding to that, the fact that you now have so many more books, so many more wines, so much more availability, where producers who could just rely on certain amount of quantities moving through certain markets, and now all of a sudden that's starting to pull back. And then on top of it, maybe they don't nail a vintage. And so it just feels more precarious, I guess.
It's precarious, I think partially because it's saturated.
Yeah.
But I think that's like the nature of life and nature of
Totally.
business. Like if you presume that gasoline fueled cars are always going to be, you know what I mean? Like I think you always have to be looking forward, and you have to sort of bless the good years that you had and always sort of have a plan B.
Yeah.
I think that's the restaurant business. I think it's so many businesses that, the rug can get pulled from under you at any point. And this presumption that people have that they will always be successful. It's like, I think I got to know Kermit Lynch's son the other day, a little bit, Anthony, maybe not the other day, the other month, we had lunch. And I was like, or Jules, like people who don't presume success, they're going to keep working at it, and they have to know that they are very lucky to have the foundation that they stand on. But yeah, anything can happen. So you better keep hustling.
Sure.
We're all a schnook, as Joe would have said. Everybody at this table, we're all schnooks.
Totally.
And so, I think that during the pandemic, people got a little full of themselves, because I was like, this is a bubble, everybody. And it's not even a healthy bubble, because it means that everybody is over consuming right now.
Yep.
So when people are like, oh, we're so low now, I'm like, you're low from the high of the high during COVID. That was never going to last.
Yeah.
You should have been putting your shekels away,
Yeah.
I'm so Yiddish today. Sorry.
It's, and then I during that period I kept saying like, this is going to pop soon, but I couldn't keep wine on the shelf, so I just kept, and then all of a sudden, then there was like definite like 18 months after the lockdown is really when it just kind of like went, oh, we're there. Everyone's got the brakes on, whether my customers who were just drinking too much and decided to take a break, a lot of people decided to quit drinking entirely, and now that's out in the zeitgeist, so that's a huge problem that we're always talking about.
I remember this one thing happened, I don't know what the year. When was the big recession? Was it 08?
08.
I was working at a restaurant called Nick and Tony's in East Hampton. And the year before, I had sold so much wine. and from our own cellar, because we used to consign wine from Cru, because Robert Bohr was our wine consultant. And so the year before, we had sold so much wine out the doors, and then when the recession hit, all of those people decided, no, I'm actually going to drink wine out of my cellar, so I'm going to BYO all the time. And so all of a sudden, the framework, the model changed to like, all these guys that used to spend $1,000 on a bottle of wine were now like, no, I need to drink my $1,000 bottles in my cellar, which probably aren't getting any better. And so they did. And I just know like this stuff can happen anytime.
Yeah, and it's everything's a cycle, right?
Yeah.
The pendulum always swings, but
Which is why I like to keep my inventory tight.
Yeah, same. Preaching to the choir here.
Yeah.
Well, and look, to be fair, when the dot-com bust happened, that was massively bad for a moment. But then what it kind of did was it sort of like
it shook out all the
shook
fake-
everything. Yeah, absolutely.
all the the stuff that shouldn't have been there in the first place.
Right, and I think that happens in every industry. It happens in every facet of life when there's just oversaturation, and then all of a sudden something happens where the bottom falls
Right.
out. There's going to be some standing.
Yeah.
You don't always know who or which, but
I mean, I know that you guys wanted to talk a little bit about tariffs today, and I'm not a tariff specialist, but it's been interesting to be on both sides of this tariff thing. And what I mean is, number one, the last tariffs that were just threatened, or I don't know if they're actually enacted, were against France, but not Italy, not maybe Germany, but not Spain. So, the lion's share of my list of what I sell, let's say I sell the most wine from Italy, even though by SKU it's probably half Italian. And so then you start like, oh, well, Italy's fine, but France isn't. And could he really do a 25% in April? Or I think at one point he threatened France with like 200%.
200. He just did it again.
We just saw those texts
Yeah.
from Macron.
Yeah.
It's really, really scary because what it does is it becomes very hard to plot and plan and buy and know how much cash flow. I remember I talked to an importer last year and they were like, they wanted to hold an event at Borgo. And when we gave them how much it was going to cost, they're like, we can't afford that because we just bought so much wine
before tariffs.
before tariffs, And so it really makes it hard to run a business where, it becomes very precarious for plotting and planning. But so that's one part to look at it. But then I have this winery in Virginia and people are like, oh, well, that must be good for you guys. And I'm just like, we're such a burgeoning market. We were already on the way up, right? We haven't hit our plateau. So we're still building. And certainly this doesn't hurt, but it's not like the thing that's going to like push us over the, you know what I mean?
Right.
So I don't know. Mostly it all sucks.
Well, but it also touches, and we did a whole episode on this before, but it touches all the ancillary things too. So it's not like, okay, well, wow, it's going to be really bad for France because these things have, much further downstream effects that ultimately end up touching everything. I mean, whether it's just directly because maybe one of the dry goods is actually imported, or so it's going to suffer a tariff, or a company that we work with has a a larger portfolio of things, so they have to spread the tariff out. I mean, it's just like when the congestion pricing came into effect. And it's like, well, of course, if I'm a delivery company like Fond du Lac or Western or anyone else, I'm going to spread that out across all my delivery. I'm not just going to say, well, only Manhattan deliveries.
Right.
So it affects everything.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, although I think it was a good thing.
Congestion pricing. Yeah, for sure. Just bringing it up as an
this
example.
Is somebody who drives.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
but just to say that all of these things have larger, more widespread
Yeah.
consequences than just what it appears like on the surface.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the companies that we love the most, yours included, are very spread between France and Italy and Germany and all of these places. So.
Yeah, and it's not like anyone's going to make a big pivot. And those things don't happen overnight either. I mean, maybe on the buying side and certainly on the consumer side.
Well, I will say that I'm much more, it's been a year and a half that Borgo has been open. And yeah, I mean, and I'm sure the same thing with you. It's like I have to look at every single invoice because it used to be that they were not allowed to change pricing within a vintage, right? But pricing is now changing within a vintage. Sometimes I think it's changing even though the wine has been here for a while, but I know that they have other considerations going on. Maybe they're getting ready for the next bump that's going to happen, or maybe again they're just trying to like soak it and spread it out in different ways. And it also means that my margins are a little bit tighter, right? Which means that our profit margin is not as robust. And, you know, the wine program takes care of a lot of salaries.
Well, you know, a lot of people have their January closeouts going on right now, so this is a good time to lay
you
in.
really want.
No, it never is. That's a reason.
Like, I would have bought it already.
Exactly. It's a no. That's all.
I've been looking though.
Yeah. What else, Mike? Anything?
I mean, you pretty much led the show, so there's not
Yeah.
much that I don't think we touched on.
Sorry.
Is there?
I had 10 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, great, perfect. I was just going to say, is there any overarching theme or final thoughts you'd like to give?
Well, I mean, I think that we've been looking down memory lane a lot today.
Yeah.
But I think there are some really fun and exciting things going on today.
100%.
I do think that the burgeoning markets that we're seeing along the Mid-Atlantic in terms of wine production and in other states like Missouri and Texas, and I think this is all good. I think this is all exciting. I also think that we have voices in wine that didn't feel empowered before, that we're seeing much more, I don't know, just like much more credibility given to a plethora of voices. It's easy to say like, oh, this person of color or this queer person or this woman, but altogether it's quite an exciting thing. We've been working with a group, really a person named Onyx Acosta, and they lead an organization called Co-Fermented, and we have an incubator program at the winery, and so we've been collaborating with them to make cuvées.
Like young upstarts coming in and doing things?
Yeah,
Cool.
creating brands for themselves, sometimes for profit, sometimes not for profit. So Onyx and Co-Fermented have been working with us for the last couple of years to do that, but we have another group coming on board that I'm kind of personally excited about. It's called Babe, and it's a queer pop-up in New York, and we're going to help them create their wine brand so that they can serve their wine at their pop-ups.
Cool.
And, you know, my niece is non-binary, and she's like a Babe groupie, and so these lovely people are coming down to start strategizing with us. I mean, this is just stuff I couldn't have seen coming down the pike in some ways. I still remember being like the only Black person touring throughout France at a lot of these events in the early days. And what I always say is that, sometimes we put a lot of stock into being like the only one or being special, whatever that is. Where are you from?
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, like the only guy from Pennsylvania at the Beef Bouteille. But yeah, it's really gratifying to see other people here to pass the baton to and to bring their point of view and looking at things in ways. You know, Onyx made a cuvee with one of our brands called Lightwell Survey recently that had that we steeped pine cones in. So it was like a Rexina ish, and it was delicious.
It's cool.
It was subtle. Just things that'd be like, no, we don't do that, sort of thing.
Yeah.
But people bringing a different perspective, different backgrounds, different energy to it, and youth.
Totally.
Great.
Well, and also to build off of something you said before, like just things being more democratic. I mean, just look at like media, right? Like, I don't watch the news anymore. I mean, because mainly I don't trust it, but also because there's so many other places where you can go and actually find like what journalism
Really
is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And that touches everything. Certainly touches the wine industry, and the more it does, the better it's going to be, and the more doors that it opens.
Yeah. And then at the same time, I think the only thing I close with is I have evolved and grown into a person that is much more thoughtful about her drinking, but I do wish that we had had more conversations earlier on about what it means to be a responsible and healthy wine professional, especially in the New York market. I feel like they have a leg up on us in California, but everything closes much earlier. But in New York, you can really go hard, and I still think it's important for us to talk about. I was at a party the other night, and so many bottles of wine on the table. And I saw somebody that I love do something that I that I was trying to discourage them from doing, which was they had wine in their glass, but they wanted to taste the thing that I was pouring, so they just threw it back. So their mouth is the spittoon, and and I was like, dude, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
You can just pour it out. Although
Yeah.
we know we hate pouring out, but I would rather people pour out than to over imbibe. And it's more than just being drunk.
Yeah.
It is about sustainability. If you want to be in this business for a long time, it is about healthfulness.
Yeah.
And women do not metabolize alcohol in the same way that men do. So if you're drinking at the same levels as the dude standing next to you, you're doing, like, it's not aligned.
Yeah.
We don't metabolize wine the same way. So just things like that. If I had any, if I can get on my soapbox, that's something that I always want to keep talking about, and I want people to really interrogate themselves about whether they're taking care of themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I mean, especially if you're looking at this like long game career.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is the point.
I mean, we're all here for the long game, so.
Right. Yeah. I will admit, I do look back nostalgically to those legendary nights or parties or dinners or whatever, but I now am at the point where I am being more, one, because of physical limitations. I just can't do it like I did when I was 27, and also I want to be, I've come to realize, like, the idea of being more thoughtful and being, just... Like
There's always tomorrow.
Yeah, it's like on some level, it's like you're listening to a piece of music at 2 times the speed just because you want to get as much in as you can. Where and then you're like, you're not appreciating anything.
Yeah.
And if you're just buying back all the wine, you're not appreciating it. So what's the point of being a wine professional with a point of view if you're not the one who's actually caring about what's going on? So yeah. Well, I can say for certain that this has been a fantastic conversation. You are a wonderful guest.
Thank you.
And we are so happy to have had you here. In some ways, I feel like your presence has kind of given the podcast a little more.
Can you imagine if I
credibility.
had to share it with somebody? I
Yeah,
wouldn't have gotten it all out.
Sometimes things work out the way they're supposed to.
Exactly. Yes. But thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having
me. I can't wait to eat at Borgo again, and wishing you the best with everything down at the winery. And I still have got to try the wines. So,
yeah, I'll make sure you do. Actually, that's something I will make sure you do for sure.
Can't wait.
Good.
Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thanks for having me.
All right.